people are going to realize that as devices get more and more connected, then you need to have a resilient network that isn't going to have central points of failure. The competitive nature of Bitcoin mining means that there's economies of scale to actually stay competitive, and so it means you have to have bigger rigs. Everyone sort of talks about the huge amount of hash rate that's securing the Bitcoin network, but it's not so much the amount of hash rate that's on the network, it's the distribution of the network. By creating a network like we have on Minima, where you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions and billions of devices doing a small amount of hash, then that creates the resilience that you need, and that is what we believe is going to be the future of having a value transfer layer of the internet. Minima is the only blockchain that can run in full on chip. If it's on chip, then it becomes something that can actually be integrated into a tech stack. It means that devices will come loaded with a fully functioning blockchain node on the device. DePIN is about connecting infrastructure networks, and the fact that Minima can run a full node on the edge in a device gives it a lot of functionality. You can do the transfer of tokens for incentive mechanisms. You can have secure communications device to device, but you can also create tokens on the device as well. So you can actually issue smart contracts. There are a lot of DePIN projects that are looking at ways to help scale digitization solutions for customers and make it, more accessible, more resilient, and also cheaper as well.
Welcome to We Are DePIN, a podcast dedicated to the world of DePIN projects. Every episode, we invite amazing DePIN projects to explain how they're revolutionising and shaping the future of DePIN and Web3. Our goal is to keep you informed about everything happening in the DePIN space. This podcast is brought to you by Minima, the real-world blockchain. Minima is a device-agnostic and fully decentralized Layer 1 blockchain. It has a lightweight architecture that enables a full node to run on any mobile or IoT device, making it exceptionally adaptable for scaling decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Minima's technology is now supported by an expansive and engaged community of over 50,000 node operators. Join us for the next insightful discussion.
Hugo, welcome to the We Are DePIN podcast. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Really good to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on. I don't know if many people know this, but We Are DePIN obviously is on behalf of Minima. Obviously, we introduced it, but what was the intention? Maybe I'll ask you before we jump into Minima. What was the intention behind We Are DePIN?
We really want to start promoting the DePIN space. Obviously, we'll come on to more detail about where we fit into that. But again, I think that at the moment, with so many different companies looking to build in the space and everything like that, we wanted to find a way to showcase projects so that everyone can learn from each other, sort of add value in that area. And so we felt that sort of having a podcast that sort of introduced people to that and allowed new projects to talk about what they do. It's a really good way of meeting new projects and also just helping build up the space from the bottom up.
We've been doing it for a number of months now, and the reception has been pretty decent, I would say, on both Twitter and YouTube and everywhere. And we get it on Telegram as well. We've got a very good community there. Obviously, we've done events as well in Singapore and Dubai. So it's grown fairly well. It's something that I guess we should be pretty proud of. And the DePIN community is still very small, and I guess, our intention of building that community even more, I think, it's a good one for sure. But let's talk about Minima. So how was Minima actually incepted? Where did it come from?
Minima was born through my co-founder, Paddy. He's a full stack coder. He was mining Bitcoin back in 2012. He's a libertarian through and absolutely loved the idea of decentralized network. And he was actually mining Bitcoin, but then noticed that as he could no longer mine it on his computer, he became concerned about the sort of centralizing of mining. But in
huge mining rigs now.
Absolutely.
In order to make it make sense.
Exactly. Yeah. The competitive nature of Bitcoin mining means that there's economies of scale to actually stay competitive. And so it means you have to have bigger rigs. And so the original white paper was thinking about having everyone mining it on their own computers, but then suddenly, as ASIC chips came along, then suddenly it became something that only huge organizations with lots of capital could actually sort of get involved with. And so again, that's leading to centralizing of the miners. Even now, there's a few mining pools already control over 51% of the hash rate on the network. So he wanted to find a way to go back to effectively the original Bitcoin white paper and find a way to have a completely decentralized network. The only way to do that is if every user on the network is an equal. And the only way to do that is to enable every user to be able to be a full constructing and validating node on the network. And at the time, the only device that everyone has, not everyone has a computer, everyone has a mobile phone. So set about finding a way to allow every user to be able to run a full node on a mobile phone. And so that's where we are now. I mean, we now have hundreds of thousands of nodes on the network, running the network by being full nodes. And it's not only does it run on mobile phones, but it also runs on IoT devices. And then the next step is to actually get it on chip as well. So literally form factor shrunk right down.
So the main sort of thing that Minima combats is being fully decentralized in that sense, because as you said, Bitcoin mining is being slowly owned by fewer companies. Yeah, I think one of the largest acquisitions in Web3 history was a crypto mining company. Like they acquired them for like a couple $2 billion, and they get these massive warehouses being built fairly regularly now. And it's just moving individual miners. I haven't heard of individual miners for a long time now. They have been shut out. So I think this might sound maybe like a stupid question, but why is full decentralization so important? Because I think in Web3 we sometimes forget that.
Yeah, no, it's easy to forget that because it's easier to be centralized rather than decentralized. The one USP of a blockchain is that it's decentralized. So it doesn't have single points of failure. Otherwise, you might as well be using a centralized SQL database, which is going to be 1,000 times faster and 1,000 times cheaper. But so if you want to have a network that is censorship resistant, then you need to have it completely decentralized. And I think that you look at the mining and everyone talks about the huge amount of hash rate that's securing the Bitcoin network, but it's not so much the amount of hash rate that's on the network, it's the distribution of the network, of the hash, because you could have one miner with an infinite amount of hash. But if you've got one miner who can then be coerced, then it becomes an insecure network. So it's about the distribution of the hash rate. And by creating a network like we have on Minima, where you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions and billions of devices on the network doing a small amount of hash rate, then that will effectively create, and they're all completely decentralized, then that creates the resilience that you need for a uncensorable network. And that is what we believe is going to be the future of having a value transfer layer of the internet that is apolitical, because as soon as you have centralizing features, that becomes politicized because it's financially motivated and all of that kind of stuff. So, and that was the premise of it. And that's what we've now built.
Yeah, and that goes away from chance of the 51% attack and stuff like that. When people have their own agendas and they own the majority of the network, they can change it, and it goes very firmly against what Web3 was invented for, right?
Yeah, people always talk about the fact that decentralization will only matter when it matters. It's a bit like having a seatbelt. It only matters when you crash.
Yeah.
But again, you have to have that seatbelt. I think it's going to need to be, people are going to realize that as devices get more and more connected, then you need to have a resilient network that isn't going to have central points of failure. And that's what we're building for.
What are the main use cases that Minima is playing in right now? And what are the main use cases that you see in the next few years or going forward the next 10 years?
We've been working a lot within the automotive industry. The automotive industry is a really interesting one because it's an industry that's going through a huge amount of change. It's going from combustion engines to electrification. It's going from people driving to automation. And it's an industry, therefore, that doesn't have solutions in place already for all of that. And so it's looking for ways to create a secure way to connect all of those effectively edge devices, cars, to each other in a secure way. I often like to think about the automotive industry is the perfect example of a permissionless network. So if you imagine a road with hundreds of different cars on it, they don't trust each other. They're made by different manufacturers, but they all need to, if they're going to become autonomous, then they need to be able to trust each other, basically. So blockchain is the perfect way to have a secure connection between devices that don't trust each other, because you have that that permissionless, trustless network and effect. So we've been working a lot with the automotive industry. About 2 years ago, we joined a mobility accelerator called Mobility X Labs with partners like Volvo, Polestar, and Geely Autos. And there we were investigating and deploying nodes on head units of vehicles. And once you have a full node running on head units of vehicles, then it's an amazing amount of functionality that you can deliver to those vehicles. And we've got three good examples. One is within battery passports. So actually having a node running on a battery moving forwards, 60% of the value of the car is going to be in the battery, because it will matter how the battery's been charged, whether it's been trickle charged or supercharged. That will have a big effect on the life of the battery. So when you buy a car now, you'll be looking at the battery's life and through its passport. And also event data recording on the vehicle as well. So regulation is coming in. So effectively it means that every new car is going to have effectively a black box, because as you move towards automation, it's going to need to have insurance companies are going to need to know exactly what happened when in the case of an accident or something like that. And having a full node on the vehicle means that you can actually timestamp the event as it happens, and so that then is an immutable record of what happened. And then finally, the area of within automotive that we're working on is within EV charging. So if you imagine there's already a sort of a big public infrastructure of EV charging, but it's not going to cope with the amount of cars that they want to bring online over the next 10 years. So what we're finding is the OEMs are trying to find ways to incentivize EV owners to actually purchase wall boxes and then actually rent them out to others in order to help add to private wall boxes to a public infrastructure network. And by having a node on your vehicle and then also on the wall charger itself, it allows for access control. So effectively, Minima can create a token for access control. So I can find your wall box on an app. I can book a space. I will be issued with an access control token. I can take that token in the car effectively to your wall box, transfer that token to you, and then your wall box will deliver a charge, and then I can leave again. So it's a bit like Airbnb. So it's the lock on the door of an Airbnb apartment, effectively. So there are multiple different ways that blockchain can really help aid the automotive industry in delivering that.
But it's funny you use Airbnb as an example, because before DePIN was a concept, I guess you could say Airbnb was a very early sort of iteration of what I guess DePIN became, was because it's like spare capacity of either hotels or private accommodation. One of the big friction points of uptake of something like Airbnb was the trust aspect. And the good thing about blockchain and what you just mentioned is that all those things, all those use cases, they're completely trustless. So when it comes to uptake of DePIN applications, I think I ask a lot of projects that come on this podcast their favorite use case of DePIN outside of what they're immediately doing. We always end with that question. And EV is one of the big things that comes up, because especially with charging, there's a short supply of charging infrastructure. That seems like that's the sort of bottleneck at the moment. Batteries is another one. And there is spare capacity with private wall boxes. And there isn't really a way of sort of them communicating with the car owners apart from a DePIN infrastructure Minima. So in my mind, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing worth, I guess, looking at the nuance of that is that in many ways, there are a lot of DePIN projects that are looking at ways to effectively sort of become an alternative solution to the centralized services that are out there already, whether it's compute or whether it is Wi-Fi or storage and stuff like that. Within the automotive and within this specific use case on EV charging, what we're effectively looking at is Web 2 companies that have a big customer base that are looking at ways to actually extend out the EV charging solution to their users. And they're using a sort of DePIN as a sort of the incentivization methodology to actually onboard more of their customers. So actually they're not trying to disrupt themselves. They're actually trying to add a decentralized infrastructure to their existing infrastructure. And it just gives much more scale to the solution. So yeah, we're finding it almost like a hybrid. So we call it enterprise DePIN in that respect of that particular solution. The DePIN sector is looking at ways to help scale digitization solutions for customers and make it more accessible, more resilient, and also cheaper as well.
Yeah.
And specifically on wall boxes, for example, the cost of charging up at a public charging station is actually pretty expensive. In some instances, it's more expensive than combustion fuel. Whereas if you actually go to private wall box owners, the infrastructure cost is much less. Obviously, Minima gives the access control, which would, in a public charging station, cost a lot of extra overhead.
Yeah.
So actually, the opportunity for people to have better access to charging, but at a sort of more competitive rate, is a win for users and those suppliers of that charging facility.
We spoke about the use cases of DePIN. I know we'll talk about other sort of things outside of DePIN, but when it comes to Minima, like powering that DePIN side and the blockchain provider, I guess like what makes Minima different in that aspect? Because DePIN is becoming a narrative, as there are other blockchains that do that. Some of them are built for DePIN, some of them aren't built for DePIN, but they're still DePIN projects built on top of them. Think of Solana as an example. So what sets Minima apart? I know the decentralization is one big piece, but is there any other benefits that you can think of in terms of like why this is so well built for DePIN?
Obviously, DePIN is about sort of connecting infrastructure networks and devices effectively. And the fact that Minima can run a full node on the edge in a device gives it a lot of functionality. It can do the transfer of tokens for incentive mechanisms, but also critically, it means that devices themselves have a huge amount of capability added. So you can have secure communications device to device. You can transfer value device to device, but you can also create tokens. So you can actually issue smart contracts from the device itself. And the fact that the device is issuing those tokens just creates a huge amount of value capture in that device and the data coming from that device. It doesn't have to talk to a centralized entity in order to add it to the blockchain. There are a lot of solutions out there, blockchain, L1 blockchains, where effectively are connecting a device to a blockchain. The way the Minima works is effectively each of the devices become part of the blockchain. So it's much more secure, much more cost effective. And so you have the ability to transfer tokens, but you also have the ability for data validation, data attestation on those devices as well. And in many ways, people talk about sort of data being the new oil and data being all important. So when you can have a device that can actually have data attestation at that level, then it becomes a very valuable proposition. And so effectively DePINs who are building on Minima benefit from the tokenization aspect, but also the data attestation element as well.
And what is the value in terms of real world application when it comes to smart devices creating tokens, the data attestation that you talked about? What's the value for the end user, or the like who does that benefit, and what are the problems that they experience right now that would solve?
It hasn't started yet in many ways. I think that as devices become more intelligent or more capable, then that is when data will become more important. I mean, there are a lot of really cool projects out there at the moment, specifically in automotive, for example, the likes of Demo and SawChain, looking at ways to help users monetize their data. And then, obviously there's a supply side looking for that. Then there's also the demand side about who's going to pay for that data. And I think that's still an ever evolving sort of landscape. I don't think there's anyone who's finally landed on the exact use case and the type of data that's going to be valuable. But I think that's going to come. So obviously once it can happen, then the results are going to come out of that. The difference is with Minima, we can offer to DePINs is that you don't have to have bespoke hardware that attaches to the car. The functionality of a blockchain will actually be inside the car itself. So it'll actually be embedded within the vehicle itself. And that's the next stage. So effectively, in the old days when satellite navigation started off, you had to buy like a TomTom or a sat-nav to actually sit on your dashboard. And that was a great step forward, but it was pretty sort of one way and sort of not very responsive. It didn't tell you about traffic jams or anything like that. It just told you where to go. Whereas now, obviously, when you buy a car, it has a sat-nav built into it. It has traffic control and everything like that, or recognizes traffic situations.
Yeah.
And I think it's that step that we are moving from an add-on into something that's inbuilt into the computers that are cars now, basically.
Yeah.
And that is the form factor change that we now have with Minima, is that rather than it being something that is connected to a blockchain that is secured by external miners or stakers, now actually the vehicle themselves are actually securing the network itself and delivering the service from there.
Yeah. There's a massive amount of data, especially when you talk about IoT devices and smart devices. These cars are all smart devices now, as you mentioned. And you can't talk about data now without talking about artificial intelligence, without talking about AI. So where does Minima play in that whole AI wave? Because you can't have data without AI now.
I think that AI is going to be the thing that really pushes crypto and blockchain rails forwards, people talk about how to onboard the next billion sort of crypto users. And those crypto users are actually going to be AI agents at the edge that need rails. So effectively, you're going to get devices that become made more powerful, more intelligent by being controlled by AI agents. And those AI agents are going to need rails in order to be able to securely communicate, to transfer value between themselves. And crypto is the perfect sort of conduit to that. That's how it's going to work. I think AI is going to continue taking over the world, but it needs a resilient, secure, decentralized rails in order to be able to do that.
And how is Minima poised to play on the AI wave? Because it's not just in Web3, but it's sort of overarching. So yeah, well, how does Minima set itself up?
So the way that Minima is set up is that Minima can run in full on a device. So it means that AI agent can be completely autonomous. It can create smart contracts, it can transfer value, and it can communicate directly from the device itself in a completely decentralized way. So it won't have any single points of failure having to link back to a centralized server anywhere. And that will give it a huge amount of autonomy. And that's the way it's going to go. It has to have autonomy in a secure way. A lot of the enterprises that we're talking to are looking at the power of blockchain, working out how they can use it. And they're looking for a network that isn't controlled by unknown entities, unknown centralized entities, where they're miners or stakers who might be competitors on a network. That you're not going to join a network where your competitor owns a huge amount of stake on that network. They want to have an apolitical network that is powered by the devices themselves and that allows that sort of value transfer without the unknown of transaction fees and everything like that, basically.
Makes a lot of sense. And you talked about the ecosystem and the partners. Do you want to highlight a few of them now in terms of like the ones that you guys are working with?
We've made a couple of big announcements recently. We're very excited about having been accepted on ARM's flexible access program. ARM, one of the biggest chip designers in the world. We're now on a program with them, partner with them to effectively have access to their IP, to be able to design a Minima node to run on chip. Because of our form factor, Minima is the only blockchain that can run in full on chip. Running on chip has a huge benefits on many levels. Critically, when an enterprise is looking to introduce technology into its tech stack, it's not just a sort of case of just having a software download onto it. You're actually looking at something that needs to be encapsulated within a chip so it doesn't interfere with the mission critical tech stack.
Yeah.
And also for regulatory purposes, for safety purposes, and also for upgrades as well. If it's on chip, then it becomes something that can actually be integrated into a tech stack. It means that devices will come loaded with a fully functioning blockchain node on the device.
Yeah.
And so that's hugely exciting. So that's one area. So it means that the integration will happen at factory level.
The reason why I think, that is insanely exciting is because, as you said earlier, everyone always talks about how do you onboard all these people that don't know about Web3, don't know about how to buy crypto, all this type of thing. And when you integrate with a chip manufacturer like they're second biggest or one of the biggest chip manufacturers in the world, at least, your people are buying their products without even knowing it, and they're also making use of the blockchain without even knowing it either. Yeah. And this is, as you said, at factory level. So a lot of IoT devices will have Minima embedded on it, and a lot of people won't even know that it's there.
That's absolutely right. We definitely feel like the way that crypto will be adopted is that, as I say, people won't even know they're using it. So it'll have the functionality, it'll be useful. I mean, the general public are not interested in being rewarded for doing something on a sort of a commercial level. They're interested in convenience and cost. If it's cheaper and easier, then they'll do that, basically. And so having a blockchain embedded on a chip, on a device, creates a huge amount of functionality that will make their life easier. Just going back to the specifics, I rock up in my car, I park up next door to an EV charger, and it automatically does the transaction. I don't have to worry about whether it's on a blockchain or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's going to be where it really takes off.
Yeah. What I also like about this is the comparison I always like to make is people were paying with cash, people were paying with credit cards, and then Apple Pay came along. And people before didn't really if you tried to describe Apple Pay to someone before, they were like, well, I can just pay with cash and card. It doesn't seem like that big of a thing. because it's just like an extra step. But now everyone uses Apple Pay or Google Pay. It's like super seamless. And I think this is that next step where people don't even need to like get their phones out or get out of their car or anything like that. The transaction, the value exchange happens instantly, and it's verifiable because of the blockchain, because of Minima. I think that is the next step. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, abstracting it away is going to be the critical thing. The current format of the project we're working on is effectively you have fiat on-ramp and off-ramp. So effectively I'll still pay you in fiat at the moment for the charge. And then we use crypto rails to secure that transaction, to give access for that transaction to happen. Once that service has been provided, you'll receive a digital receipt, and then I'll have received the charge, and then you will receive fiat off the back end as well. So at the moment, it's sort of fiat on-ramp, fiat off-ramp, with blockchain rails to have provided that in a secure way. That's become second nature to people. So they'll just see it as a normal transaction.
Yeah.
Actually.
Just so people get a full picture, what sort of chips do ARM manufacture, and what sort of devices do they go into that Minima will be embedded in?
I think ARM are in 90% of mobile phones, and in pretty much any device that has a chip in it, basically. So it can be as washing machines become connected, as toasters become connected, as light bulbs become connected. If they can fit a chip in, then they will, basically. So it'll be in everyday devices. And I think that it just opens up to, a huge explosion in where crypto will add value.
What's also an amazing thing is people, again, always say, how do we onboard the next billion users? There's more smart devices, IoT devices, than there are people. So you're also onboarding several billions of devices. One person might own 10 or 20 smart devices, So you're onboarding not only that extra billion, but also onboarding there's so many more products.
You'll see very clever people on X talking about the fact that there are going to be more daily active machines than there are daily active users now in crypto. And I think that's definitely the way forward. There will be crypto users, but most of it's going to be machine to machine. That's where it's really going to proliferate. Obviously, AI at the edge is going to be the thing that facilitates that. And again, I think that, as you said, that's a movement from all those sort of step changes, from mobile phones to smartphones, from devices to smart devices. All of that is going to be the same kind of step change, with AI agents at the edge, just making smarter and smarter devices at the edge. And they're going to be more and more powerful with the ability to transfer value with secure communications.
We recently had an event in Singapore where we showcased a film that we made where Minima collaborated with Race Labs, with McLaren. And it was a very cool experience, and the film reception went very well. What's Minima's involvement in the motorsport industry?
It's been a great sort of journey with them. In many ways, it evolved out of our sort of work within the automotive industry vertical in general. Obviously, motorsport is always at the pinnacle of innovation and technology. And there's a huge amount of value that can be created from adding a sort of blockchain functionality to motorsports and motor racing. What we've been doing, we've been working with a company called Influx that has a data logger, and they've been connecting the data logger to race cars. And we have a node running on that data logger. And it means that you can actually capture the data from the car itself. So the car can actually generate NFTs of that data. So immutable records of the data coming from the car. And that is hugely important for sort of three areas within motorsports. Firstly, for the race organizers. So obviously the race organizers need to know that the cars haven't been tampered with during the race, because they get tested beforehand, tested afterwards, and make sure they haven't been detuned in testing and then retuned up during the race and everything like that. And so it's an immutable truth of what the car's been doing and how it's been performing. And so for race organizers, it's hugely important. It also allows teams to actually receive data during the race as well, which is also very important for them in terms of, absolute records of that. But specifically as well within fan engagement as well, because motorsport fans are hugely interested in the data that's coming from the cars. They're data geeks. Our head of comms, Luke, is a huge self-confessed motorsports geek and loves all the data that's coming from the cars. So what you're actually doing now is the ability for those fans to actually take ownership of NFTs that are generated by the vehicles of fastest lap, quickest pit time, highest braking, all of that kind of stuff. Unlike a lot of sports where NFTs were videos of a sporting moment that they can get tapped into an NFT, this is actually the vehicle itself in the race generating the data, the NFT itself, basically. And so it becomes a very exciting opportunity, not least for fans, but also for race organisers to help in many ways increase the monetization for their sponsors as well. So we had a lot of interest from that. As I say, we did a documentary about it explaining how all of this works. And so it's a very nice synergy between the work that we're doing in motorsports and the work that we're doing in the wider automotive area. And it's really just showcasing the art of the possible. And so, it's been really good, and we've met some very exciting projects as a result of that.
What was surprising to me is that within motorsports, the data that they produce, there's so much data that's produced firstly, but secondly, the way that they transfer that data or make it readable by other people is fairly slow and inefficient right now. Like a lot of them, they still print stuff out, and they still it's pretty crazy. Like they work off Excel spreadsheets, some of them as well. It seemed a bit crazy to me, but that's why something like blockchain makes a ton of sense, because it's uncorruptible firstly, but also it's far more efficient than what they already use.
Absolutely. Especially, we've been working a lot within the sort of GT3 and GT4 races. And at that level, they have a parc fermé, which is the sort of after the race, they lock the cars down and then they go and test them all out. And this can take a couple of hours. So they actually sometimes, in some cases, they actually don't get a sort of a confirmation on a race result for a few hours. And if you're running nodes on the vehicles, then they can actually have an immutable instant record of that. So, there's a lot of efficiency that can be achieved from that as well. So, it's only a matter of time before that kind of thing becomes the norm within those races.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's move on to token, because Minima has had a wrapped token for a while, an ERC20 token, and now the native token launched on Bitsmasters as the first exchange, right? Very exciting stuff. What was the premise behind the native token launch, and where does it fit into the Minima roadmap?
Yeah, so Minima is its own unique blockchain. So it's not a fork of any other chain. So obviously is a challenge for centralized exchanges to integrate with a completely new token, especially one that is as decentralized as Minima. So as you mentioned, we launched with a wrapped token back in March of 2023. And so that's been trading since then. And we've been working in the background in order to create the sort of the interface for centralized exchanges to integrate with our own native token. We've been working with a number of exchanges, so Bitmart and also MEXC. We've been very collaborative, and we've been working with them to actually launch native. It's very exciting for us because obviously having our native token live now just means that it's much more accessible for users to actually get hold of Minima and be able to start benefiting from its utility. So it's a big step for us getting our native token listed, and we're excited to see where it goes from next. We've been building out additional infrastructure around that. So we have at the moment, you can run a full node on an Android device, but we now have a public wallet, so you can actually log into a website and you can actually create your own node running off a mega node, which means that you have complete non-custodial ownership of your Minima, but you can access it through a website. So it's exciting stuff.
So Hugo, we're going to wrap up the podcast fairly soon. Absolute pleasure having you on. I want to ask you one last question, and that's, what is Minima's vision for the future?
Yeah, our vision is to effectively connect all devices. We want to be embedded in all devices to actually create a value transfer layer for connected devices, which means that any device can interact securely and transfer value securely, but device to device in a way that is completely resilient because it's so decentralized. It doesn't have any centralizing actors, no centralizing features at all that could become single points of failure. We believe that if you have a blockchain node embedded in devices, then with that amount of functionality, it creates a very resilient network, and one like the internet, effectively, an internet for connected devices.
And where do you see the future of DePIN more broadly and decentralized AI?
DePIN is a very strong use case for blockchain and crypto. And I think there's some very exciting projects coming out looking at ways to, within energy, within storage, obviously, compute, all of that kind of area. And I think it's only going to grow in terms of what's capable. I think as devices become more more powerful and more empowered by AI agents and the functionality of those devices, then it's only going to grow as a sector. What we'll find is that DePIN and AI will converge as well, because obviously those AI agents are going to make the infrastructure at the edge more and more capable, more and more powerful and empowered. And obviously you need the rails, the crypto rails to do that, not least to sort of incentivize people to be part of that, but also to allow those devices to transfer value between themselves in a secure way.
Well, Hugo, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, on the We Are DePIN podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Is there anything that you want to push in terms of what people can expect in the coming weeks and months?
We've had a lot of good announcements. There'll be some more to come as well. So check out our socials. Please get in touch if you're interested in getting involved with Minima. We're always very keen to hear about new projects.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hugo.
Thank you.
I'll talk very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion, brought to you by Minima, the real-world blockchain. The only layer 1 blockchain lean and compact enough to run in full on any mobile or IoT device. If you're new to DePIN, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter to stay up to date. Thank you so much again. We'll catch you in the next episode.